Good afternoon. This is my second installment of the Pajama Chronicles, which will probably take place on a Sunday. A day of rest for some, but you know what? I rested enough, and now I'm ready to come back and talk to all of you. And this is interesting. I just started this book. It's actually Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. And maybe because of my public school education, as a teenager in school, I was never forced to read this book. And it's probably a good thing because I probably wouldn't have appreciated it when I was in high school. But this book has special meaning to me, mostly because it was my mother's. Yes, and most of you know that my mother was killed in 2004 through malpractice at a local hospital after routine surgery. And she died very suddenly. And these books, this collection of books that she had as a teenager, are very precious to me. They're not worth any money, but they're beautifully bound and they are the classics. And so as I opened this book to start reading it, I saw that my mother had written her name in it, in her handwriting, in her maiden name, Christina Pavlidis. And when I turn the pages, I think, wow, my mother turned these pages, and my mother's eyes read these words. So this is a very special book, and I'm going to take my time reading it and enjoy every minute of it. Because now at age 54, I can actually appreciate Jane Austen, whereas I'm sure as a teenager I would have thought it was completely boring and not anything I was interested in. But today I am interested. I'm interested because this book was held by my mother when she was a young woman. And my mother loved reading. She did. She loved to read. And she did pass that down to me, the love of reading. She was an only child. I was an only child. And some of the best things as I got older and was able to read the same books that she read, that we would both read the same book and then talk about them. It was really fun to do that. Many people have asked me, so how did you become Political Paula? I've made a lot of new friends over the last couple of weeks because of some of the provocative shows I've done that have gotten quite a few comments, which we will address next week on Political Paula show. But did you become Political Paula because you were raised in a household where politics were discussed? No. Well, your mother raised you were raised by a single mother. Did your mother contribute to you becoming Political Paula? Well, yes and no. First of all, my mother was terrified of a confrontation. My mother would never get into an argument. She would walk away from an argument. That doesn't sound like me, does it? No, God bless her. But what happened because of my mother's demeanor, she allowed people to walk all over her. She allowed people to manipulate her. And even as a very young person, I would say by the time I was 11 or 12, I saw this and I recognized it for what it was, manipulation. It was mostly done at the hands of our family. The family that when my grandfather died 3 months before I was born insisted that my mother was going to, with her new husband, she had only just married my dad in June. Yes, she was pregnant when she got married. There's no shame in that. And he was American, not Greek, which to my grandmother was horrific. She hated my father. And so when my grandfather died in September of 1964, and my mother was 6 months pregnant, she had just gotten out. She had just married my father in June. They had gotten their own apartment. They were going to live a life separate from my grandmother's manipulative control. And my grandmother was a controlling woman. Today, she would probably be diagnosed with some form of a mental illness. She was horrifically paranoid, afraid of anything in the world, very restrictive, and it was her way or the highway. And she felt that she ruled the roost. She was the queen of her castle. And so when my grandfather died and all the uncles and aunts got together and said to my mom, well, you and George, my father, you need to move in. with your mother, or else she's going to lose the house, this house. And again, my mother didn't say no. And it's interesting because I have other cousins who also got married around this same time in the 60s. And they had mothers too, Greek mothers. And yet they put their husbands and their children first. They loved their mothers, but they weren't going to give up their lives and take care of their mothers. But my mother, as the only child, well, she was easily manipulated because she didn't want to disappoint anybody. She was so afraid of confrontation. So she and my dad moved in here, and my dad lasted 3 months after I was born. I was born in December. My father was out by March. They were divorced. He couldn't stand it, and I don't blame him. Believe me, as a child growing up in this house with my grandmother, I wanted to leave. And if I could have, I would have. Many, many times. I know my mother had dreams as a young girl. She had dreams for herself, and she was a very smart woman. So smart. She would do the New York Times crossword puzzle in pen. She had a huge vocabulary. And yet she ended up working at a government job that she hated for 45 years to support me, which was her job, but also to support my grandmother, which, to be honest with you, was not her job. My grandmother had 7 brothers and sisters, some of them very well-to-do, who could have helped and never raised a finger, because it was my mother's job as her dutiful Greek daughter to take care of her. And after my mother got divorced, well, the cousins who were married and had their own houses, I'm sure my mother looked at them in awe and wonder. How she wished she had a wonderful husband who was a good provider. How she wished she could stay home and watch soap operas and cook good food. I bet she would have learned. My mother was a horrible cook, but she never had to cook. But I bet my mom wished that was her life. And I bet my mom wished that some of my cousins would have been more open to her. My mother used to tell me as a child that she was never invited to my cousins' dinner parties on a Saturday night or a Friday night because she made the table uneven, since she didn't have a husband. She never told anybody else that, but she told me that. How sad she felt that she didn't feel that she was part of her family, simply because she didn't have a husband. It's interesting that finally, when my mother had enough, she didn't get angry, because she never did. She didn't scream and yell at anybody. She simply said to my grandmother in 1984, I can't do this anymore. You're bedridden. My daughter is suffering. I cannot do this anymore. You're going in a nursing home. And the whole family lost their minds. All the cousins and the aunts and the uncles. How can you put your mother in a nursing home? Well, you know what's really funny is when their turn came, they put their mothers in nursing homes because their mother was interfering with their beautiful lives with their husbands and their children. See, it's funny. My mother was forced to put her mother first, and then me, and then her job. That was her priorities. Oh, and of course the Greek church. How to go to the Greek church. How to serve the Greek church. That was very important. Try to get me to marry a Greek boy. Yeah, right. But it is funny how, because my mother didn't have a husband, nobody ever offered to help her out with my grandmother's care. My grandmother was bedridden. She had a catheter. And her room was right next to my room as a teenager, 13, 14, 15 years old. I had no privacy. The doorway was separated by a very thin curtain. I couldn't go to my room and have any privacy because the relatives would come and barge into the house. My mother had to drop everything she was doing. They never called first. And serve them coffee and biscuits and whatever they wanted. And they would always go up to Granny's room right next to mine, so I couldn't even go to my room for any privacy because they were in there chit-chatting, yap, 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 sometimes talking in Greek, whatever. My grandmother kept her television on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How is a teenage girl supposed to study in her bedroom in that environment? But again, grandmother came first. It was my mother's job. It was her full-time job along with her other full-time job that paid for everything. And then there was me. So you know what? Yes. Life, experiences, that is what made me Political Paula. Now, back when my mother died, there was no internet. For me, at least, I didn't have the internet, and I didn't have Facebook. But I will tell you that in 2004 is when I think Political Paula was actually born. And that is because of my mother and my grandmother and my family, the big fat Greek family who feels that being Greek, it means you're better than everybody else. You should only hang out with Greek people. Or if you don't, then make sure that you convert the American people to Greek Orthodoxy and make sure the children are raised in the Greek Orthodox Church. Oh my God. See, I always felt that I wasn't better than anybody else simply because of something that I had no control over, like where my ancestors came from. That doesn't make me better than anyone else. I'm not better than anyone else because I'm Greek. I'm not better than anybody else because I'm a woman or because I'm white. I'm certainly not better than anyone else because I have a great husband. That shouldn't make you better than someone else. It shouldn't make you look down on someone else like my mother was looked down on because she didn't have a husband. That wasn't right. But my mother took it, and my mother always had a smile on her face, and she never told any living soul, except for me, when I became an adult, how badly she felt. My mother never shared her dreams with me. She never said, oh, if I hadn't had you, I would have wanted to do this. Because, of course, that would have made me feel like a mistake. My mother never made me feel like a mistake. But I wonder, when I see the books that my mother read, her vocabulary, her intelligence, her compassion, the fact that everybody loved her, the fact that she never said a bad word about anybody, and I never saw her have a real fight with anybody, I wonder what she could have been if she hadn't had me. But again, it probably wouldn't have mattered, because my grandfather would have died, and she would have still had her duty to my grandmother. And my grandmother would have made sure all of my mother's dreams died before they even came to close to fruition. My grandmother was a dream killer. She was a happiness killer. My grandmother didn't like happiness. She was never happy. She was always miserable about something. I guess maybe I'm like her in some ways. Because if I actually wake up in the morning, I can find something to be miserable about. Just about every day. But I also, at least, try to say, Mom, give me something to be happy about today. And I always find something to be happy about every day. Or I try to. I haven't realized my dreams either. But at least I try. I try with this show. And after my mother died in 2004 and I saw the true manipulation of my family members and how much they cared more about the Greek community than they did about me and my mother as part of their blood family. It was all about the Greeks. Oh, so-and-so's here from the Greek church. Paula, you have to say hello. Why do I have to say hello? My mother left the Greek church 2 years ago. My mother is not a member of this church anymore. I don't want to talk to these people. They kicked my mother to the curb because she broke one of their huge commandments. Thou shalt not pay another priest to marry you, even if it's a Christian priest. You only can pay Father Veronis at the Greek Orthodox Church $600 to get married, or else no communion for you. Yeah, see, no. These people come up to me at my mother's funeral. They want to be my friend. No, you're not my friend because you weren't a friend of my mother. And my mother would never tell you that to your face. I will. That's when Political Paula was born. You know, I saw a memory on Facebook today that I wrote 4 years ago where I said, was I born? Am I the person I was born to be? I was meant to be on the day of my birth? I don't think any of us are. I think we become what we experience in a lifetime. And experiences change us, for better or for worse. My mother's death, some will say, changed me for worse. When I look in the mirror, I think it changed me for the better. Because I will tell you that I will never allow anyone to manipulate me into doing something I don't want to do. I don't do things because it's my duty to do them. I don't do things because I'm expected to do them. If someone dies and they say, well, we'll see you at the funeral, I'll be like, well, actually, no, you won't. I'm sorry. I'm not coming to the funeral. I haven't seen this person for 10 years. They don't call me. I didn't call them. We never had dinner together. I don't know this person. I'm not going to the funeral. But we're family. No, see, we may have the same blood running through our veins. But I submit to you, that's not what makes a family. I have friends who have no blood like mine in their veins who are closer to me than any family member. People who do have the same blood running through their veins. And I am closer to my American friends than any Greek person I ever knew or am related to. Because to me, you don't choose your friends by what church they go to. You don't choose your friends by where their ancestors came from. You don't choose your friends by blood. Everyone has their own litmus test for friendship, for someone you're close enough to actually go to their funeral. And my litmus test is pretty high. I actually have to have a relationship with you to go to your funeral. And I actually have to recognize you to go to your wedding or your baby shower or your bridal shower. This family thing is one thing, but I will remember this about my mom. I know at one point in her life she must have had dreams because she read these books. And these classics, these books, they were all about dreams. And in the books, because of when they were written, this book was published in 1838 for the first time by Jane Austen. A lot of these books end with happy endings. The dreams come true. My mother did not have a happy ending. Even when she remarried in 2000, she put on a happy face and said how thrilled she was to have married her childhood sweetheart. But he came with baggage too, in the form of loser children and a grandchild that was constantly in my mother's face. She was not thrilled to death and happy and, ooh, it was a fairy tale in her marriage, although she would never have told any of you that. You didn't know. But she told me, her daughter. While we sat at the dining room table, she with her Diet Coke and cigarette, me with my pink Catawba wine, which I drank back then, and my cigarette, and we talked. She told me about her unhappiness. She told me about her disappointments. She told me about the people who had wronged her in her life. She would never tell any of you because that's not how my mom rolled. So here I am. I'm Political Paula. And I come to you on my shows and in my blogs, and I do tell you how I feel. I think watching my mother be passive and manipulated and never wanting to confront anybody or tell someone, you know, you hurt my feelings or I don't like that or I'm not going to do that. I think that taught me to be who I am. Life experience. I was not born Political Paula. And the life experiences that I had that created her Well, a lot of them I wish I hadn't had. But I did, and that I cannot change. I can't change what happened to me in the past or what's going to happen to me tomorrow. But what I can do is deal with them in a way that I hope will make my mother proud. If she is, by some chance, looking down on me right now and say, you know what, Mom? You allowed them to do this shit to you, but your daughter won't allow it. Your daughter doesn't take any crap. Your daughter is a true person. When I write to you here and when I talk to you here, I tell you my truth. I don't lie to you. I don't make up things. I tell you my truth. And then you get to decide if you agree with it, disagree with it, if you'd like to debate it. I'm open for that always. But it always comes from my truth. And that's the one thing that my mother never felt comfortable or safe sharing with anybody. And I'm going to tell you, I am so proud and honored that all of you, my viewers, that you tune in or you read what I write, and that you do hear my truth, that you are there to listen when no one was there for my mom. And every show I do, every blog I write, and every book that I read, I say, this is for you, Mom. I'll see you all back here on Tuesday.